Special report on leadership. Now moving on to welcoming our special guests who are joining us today in discussing leadership across the continent. First off, we have Chris Nwa-Oko-Bia, who was a notable presidential candidate in 2011, and he is currently a member of the TH.E.F.TS Presidential Campaign Council in 2023. Also joining us is Omoyele Sowore, who is founder of the African Action Congress Party and a notable presidential candidate in 2019 and most recently in 2023. Very warm welcome, Sowore and Nwa-Oko-Bia. Nwa-Oko-Bia is joining us from the Abuja studio, and Sowore is here with us in Lagos. Sowore, let's start with you. With a population of over 200 million citizens, expected to increase to 400 million, by 2050, Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, faces very significant human development challenges, currently ranking 150 out of 157 countries in the World Bank's Human Capital Index. Where did we get it wrong and what lies ahead?
Well, thank you for bringing me. And it's also great to see Chris on the screen on the other side. I think it's very interesting that the World Bank is the one expressing to the world that we are now lacking in human capital development. But what we must understand is that Nigeria was subjected to economic policies that actually degraded its capacity to produce people with capacity. And that was through the structural adjustment programs that was imposed on the military and that was executed precisely to achieve the objective that they are now reporting on. I became an activist.
Can you tell us some of those policies?
Yes. First and foremost, in 1989, as I was arriving at the University of Lagos, the World Bank was also giving Nigeria a $120 million loan, supposedly to fix our universities. But they knew that we didn't need that loan. What we needed was a leadership that could have invested in education. But the structural adjustment program specifically targeted the number of universities. Said there were too many universities, government had no business investing in free education. But look at it, some 30-something years later, the people that were half-trained by Nigerian universities are now being brought to the UK, Europe, and America as doctors after COVID-19 hit them. So had we had that opportunity to progress when we started free education, invested in education the way we should, had we had the opportunity to have an unbroken leadership in the civilian sector, we would not have had that break that led to the destruction of that human capital development they are reporting upon. So they are guilty. The World Bank, the IMF, they are guilty of this. They know the kind of policies that they have spread over time.
But you know, leadership changes hands, so the leadership then will be different from the leadership today. Whoever put the report together will be different from who's managing other aspects.
Because we are still dealing with structural adjustment program. The current dislocation that they imposed on Nigeria through the removal of so-called fuel subsidy, it was a World Bank and IMF prescription. And the man who read it on the day of his own inauguration probably didn't even think about the fact that the moment you have 80% of your economy in the informal sector, you just can't come up one day and destroy opportunities that people have to do business and live. Because you already know the statistics of how many Nigerians are living below $1 per day. And what is $1 today is almost 950 naira to a dollar. As of 6 months ago, the naira was stronger than it is today. It has depreciated over time. So what I'm saying is that it's not as if we should blame the World Bank and the IMF all the time for, but you would link that with the kind of leadership they also promote. I'm talking about the West on the continent of Africa, the kind of characters they impose. And I think we're going to talk about this later. You know, since independence on the continent of Africa, what it did, you know, killing the real leaders of Africa who fought for independence. Some of them were killed through coups. Some of them were killed through, you know, mysterious plane, you know, crashes. And they have now also started directly, you know, killing people. And you now have reached a point where even military rule has returned to the continent of Africa. Africa is not making progress with the return of the military to power. You now find even a new generation of young Africans who are hailing military Boy Scouts, who are taking over all these African and West African countries. That's not progress. But you cannot divorce that from the history of Africa, how Africa got to where it is, and the position of these institutions, international institutions, who keep imposing upon Africans economic policies that would not allow Africa to develop, especially their position on education, their position on public welfare, housing. You know, when I came to Lagos...
So you're saying they are currently dictating Africa's status at the moment?
Look, the most powerful person internationally in Nigeria is probably the IMF country director. They can walk into your president at any time and tell him, oh, this is not going to work. Even when they say it in private and you don't listen, they call a press conference and say, we are not going to accept Nigeria's economic policy because this is not good for us. But they know what they are doing. They are preparing your country for their factories to dump whatever it is they want to dump on you. It is easier now to impose Americans' wheat on the Nigerian bread industry to make bread. But guess what? The farmers who are growing wheat in America are the most subsidized farmers in the US. So how do you compete with a farmer who is subsidized to grow wheat in America? And through the WTO, the World Trade Organization, imposes that you must take a certain tonnage of wheat into your country, whether you like it or not. That will kill your own local production of wheat, which we are capable of doing. So a lot of people don't know that some of these policies are part of the reasons why they are killing us. And that is why the West don't like African leaders who are conscious, who are brilliant, who understand the mechanics of how they manipulate our economic policies to pauperize us. They like cooking up numbers. You mentioned earlier that Nigeria is the biggest economy on the continent of Africa. I don't know how you came about that. How are we big when we don't have electricity?
You understand? Potentials.
Well, maybe potentials.
The economic
but how are we big when you don't have electricity?
Buoyant.
You can't even electrify like half of a city. How can you be big?
Yeah.
It's not a big economy.
Well, let's look at our
Nigeria is the big for nothing, what Fela used to call BBC, big blind country on the continent of Africa.
With huge potential.
It has huge potential, but for you to get to that potential, you must remove the roadblocks. Leadership is a major factor in making sure that Nigeria is in charge of the destiny of Africa. The fact that we need ECOWAS to speak to Boy Scouts in Nigeria and all that shows our weakness. If Nigeria were to be the right country, in position that it ought to be on the continent of Africa, we don't need West Africa to tell our neighbors in Nigeria that they should sustain democracy.
Absolutely. Let me bring in Unwa Okobia from our Abuja studio. Unwa Okobia, how would you analyze Nigeria's current government and state of leadership in line with what Sowore just said? What's updates on the judiciary matters ongoing? And do you foresee Nigeria having a seat at global leadership gatherings, including the BRICS and the upcoming G20, within the nearer future?
Let me first of all appreciate Arise TV for this incisive dialogue, if you like. Let me salute my brother there. Interestingly, we've come a long way. We were born in the same year. And our passion for a new Nigeria, a new Africa, and a new deal for our people is top-notch. But let me clearly say that as we discuss these issues, we must locate leadership in Nigeria and indeed Africa in proper perspective. Do we have leaders? And some of my friends will say, oh, at best what we have are rulers who are egocentric, who are self-centered, who are egotistic, and to whom leadership is just about me, myself, and I. I think that the way forward for Africa is first to grow leaders who are nationalistic, who are Pan-African, and who, beyond populism, care about their people and about our continent. We need Pan-Africanists who truly will determine the destiny and the fate of the African continent and indeed our people. Can Nigeria get into BRICS and perhaps occupy a seat at the United Nations Security Council? The answer is yes, but how? When? And how can we do that? And let me say simply that we must first of all grow leaders who are totally people-centered and people-centric. We must grow leaders who truly care about you and I, who truly care about our country, and who truly care about the masses of our people. Until that is done, you know, there's a popular cliche that we all grew up knowing, and that obtains even in the deepest and the most exclusive rooms where policies and global issues are discussed. Charity begins at home. How much charity do you have at home? My brother there noted something which is very germane. Do we have leaders who are able to say to the World Bank and the IMF, to this extent is yes, and to this extent is a capital no? Because every country that's come out of poverty to promise, every country that's come out of disease and despondency to greatness, every country that's come out of want to plenty, has policies that are intrinsic, traditional, and natural to it, not policies thrown on her by the World Bank, the Bretton Woods, and the IMF. And for as long as our leaders, I have the incumbent president a few days ago saying that he's under pressure to go to war in Niger. If you emerge through a credible electoral process, you don't need pressure to ask Nigerians to do what is right. If your electoral victory, quote unquote, were proper, trite and right, fair and just, all you need to do is hop into the Nigerian presidential aircraft and go to Niger and negotiate with the people. But because you lack the moral nexus to so do, because you lack the credibility to so do, because you lack the capacity on account of how you emerged to so do, Nigerians will look at you like I don't know how verified the statement is from Burkina Faso, that they know who actually won the last election, so you don't have the right to tell them or school the world on democracy. So I think that's where I agree with my brother and friend. African leaders must ensure that they emerge through honorable processes. African leaders must ensure that democracy means truly what it is. A government of the people, as defined by Abraham Lincoln, for the people and by the people. And when we truly dish and deal service to the people, then we can, as it were, emerge not only as leaders of the West African sub-region, not only as leaders of the Sahel region, but leaders of Africa, because we're the most populous country in Africa. But I think that what we're doing today is a call to the conscience of our nation, a call to the conscience of the political leaders, a call to the conscience of our people, and indeed, a new generation that are saying that things must be done rightly. I believe that if we have leaders that are responsible and responsive to the people, if we have leaders that are Afrocentric and African-centered, if we have leaders who are pan-African and pan-Nigerian, then sooner rather than later, the global organizations that care and that are sincere will come cutting us. But until that is done, a place in the United Nations Security Council is like a wait for Godot. Seeking for a place in the BRICS is like a wait for Godot. And I want to say very strongly as we go on with this conversation that the time has come for us to move away from populism to patriotism and nationalism.
Thank you.
We need leaders who will care and not. Let me chisel this home. My brother talked about the fuel subsidy. All over the world, in Britain, in the United States of America, in Germany, farmers and farming is subsidized. All over the world, largely energy is subsidized. Why is the IMF and the World Bank telling us that the way out of the morass is subsidy? I think that what leaders must do in Africa and indeed this country is to curb corruption. If I tell you what corruption goes on in the oil sector, you will know that the solution to our problem is not in the removal of subsidy, but in the curbing of corruption. Trillions of dollars, trillions of naira are stolen by people who are protected by the state, are stolen by people who are protected by the PDP, the APC, and those who politic with our collective destiny. The way out of the morass is to check corruption, not increasing poverty for the masses of our people and making lives better for the rich. That's the way to go. We must be African-centric and pan-Nigerian in leadership.
We must be an ideal candidate for president of Nigeria.
See, you have to look at power from the point of view of service. And I think Chris had mentioned that we have produced over the years very egocentric leaders in this country who care more about themselves, their friends and families, and not the Nigerian people. And you must also look at those of us, particularly those of us who want to claim to be young, where we stood when it mattered most in this country. And I can't say that enough. You see, it's not always true that somebody suddenly decides when they've turned 45 years old, 50 years old, or 60, that they want to change their country. When, as a matter of fact, when your services were needed for the country, when you're in your 20s, you just didn't partake. You didn't partake in fighting for the rights of your people. You didn't partake in fighting for the rights of your mates when you're in the university. And then when it's time for compensation, or compensatory leadership, as I like to call it, you say, yes, we love this country. We want to work for the country. We want to make things work. I come from a long tradition of sacrifice. And when people want to choose their leaders, we always say that they should look for leaders who have pedigree, who have integrity, who have history. And I think I fall into all these categories. And leaders who can make sacrifices, leaders who can deny themselves of comfort when it's needed so that their own people can have comfort. Leaders who can speak to issues affecting their people, leaders who can motivate. Because sometimes when people talk about leadership, they think the moment you're a president, you should also be the accountant, you should be the doctor. No, leaders who also becomes the human resource center of the country, who can find the best hands to work with to make the country move forward at all times. That is where people like us come in. Leaders who have education, not literacy. So that you can have a good spectrum of understanding of the country that you are planning to lead. You see, I always say this, that Nigeria is not complicated as our leaders make it sound. But what is complicated is that the leaders themselves don't understand the nature of complexity. To the point that the only excuse they give you is that, oh, Nigeria is complicated. Oh, Nigeria is too difficult to handle. But you look at the size of Nigeria itself. I studied geography and planning at the University of Lagos. That was my first degree. You should ask yourself, how long does it take to fly from one part of Nigeria to the other? Maybe an hour to Maiduguri from Lagos. If you have a good aircraft, it'll take you there in an hour. But there's a president in the US, a country that has 50 states, of which one state, Alaska, is bigger than Nigeria. One state, Alaska, is bigger than Nigeria. And you can fly from the east coast of the US to the west coast, that is New York to California, for 6 hours. You are still in the air. But in this country where you can travel from one place to the other in a few hours, is considered or regarded as complex. And then you put in charge of that country, people have no understanding of how to run a country. You have a US that has maybe only 20 ministers. We have 42 here in Nigeria. The US is a country of 350 million people and an economy that is in trillions. They have maybe 100 and something senators. Here, with an economy of a state, equivalent of a state in the US, we have 109 senators and how many House of Assembly, National Assembly members. All these guys are just wasting resources that should belong to the people. And then we have population. Population has become a blessing to countries. China is blessed with population. They are using it positively. India is blessed with population. But Nigeria has 200 million people. It is not the population that is the problem. It's the population of the thieves that is Nigeria's problem. They are not many, but they are the ones who have access to resources that should belong to everybody. How did we get to this conversation that I'm breaking down to you? Is the question you asked me about leadership. those who ran Nigeria in the 60s, after independence, they were in their 20s. But those who are running Nigeria now, you don't even know their age, which is a problem. So you have a problem of integrity. You have a problem of people with no pedigree, people who are fraudulent in nature, running the country. You're expecting the country, as Chris said, to make progress when the meaning of democracy has been turned upside down. The reason why the people of Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali are making fun of us is because they know that the democracy we claim we are practicing here is not democracy. So what is the difference between a coup plotter in army uniform and a coup plotter in civilian garb? They are the same. The moment you cannot have an organized, free and fair election with integrity, you have no moral right to discuss democracy anywhere in the world, even if it is in Palau, one of the smallest countries in the world. They will make mockery of. That's why we're a joke on the continent of on the West African coast. You know, say Nigeria president said we should go and invade Niger. But had Nigeria had credibility in leadership and integrity, you don't need to go to. You'll be a moral voice. You say to them, look, we are neighbors. I'm sorry, you cannot overthrow your government. Go and wait for another election. Look at them. They are saying they want 3 years. You know, and I'm sure in 3 years' time, they would change either their uniform to Agbada. And what I find very sad about it is that in the midst of the conversation, we are still being controlled like marionettes by the West and the East Bloc. You know, people now prefer Russia to America. That is how we got into the situation we're in the 60s. That whole East and West Bloc dichotomy and the use of the African continent as experimental space for whatever their own ideological things are. I don't want to be controlled by the US, but I also don't want a Putin to be my role model.
Let me throw the same question to our guest in Abuja. Unwa Okobia, are you still with us? You ran for president in 2011, and in 2023 you supported Peter Obi. Can you tell us why you believe he's an ideal president for Nigeria?
Let me say clearly first that what obtains in our country is a quest for anybody who truly loves our country, who's patriotic, who cares about the way earth of the Nada to promise. It should be about patriotism and nationalism first. And permit me use the word, my brother will understand me when I say this, and I think that going forward, we would have and must have to all sit down together as people who bear the scars of military rule. Interestingly, he was in the university about the same time I was. We went through all kinds of terror, harassment, and we were harangued by the military. And we stood for the values that we believe in. And let me say clearly that the time has come going forward for all of us to sit down and try to not only redefine leadership in this country, but in Africa, because save and accept will wake up like Mo Ibrahim challenged. Save and accept African young men and women, and permit my choice of word, I'd rather use young men and women rather than just the age grade that you call youth. People who think they're vivacious, people who think their commitment is for a new deal and a new day. The time has come for us to unite and work towards betting a new day, a new deal and a new tendency for Africa. Why did I support Peter Gregory? Of the, permit my choice of word again, leading candidates, he came across as the most passionate, he came across as the most determined, he came across as the most patriotic. But what is important for me here is not about the elections that are gone. What is important for me here is, and that's why I'm here passionately speaking to the young people who are listening, is about how we take back our country for good. Interestingly, that was the mantra my brother in the studio, Shore, used in his campaign. take back our country for good. Because even except we do so, the traditional politicians will not understand the challenge of now, the urgency of now. And I want to say clearly, without equivocation, that successive African leaders, successive leaders in this climb, have been more perfidious in presenting pan-Nigerian manifestos. They haven't been sincere. It's been me, myself, and I. And as I talk to you, what is important moving forward is for us to challenge those who, either by subterfuge or electoral larceny, claim to be in power today, to think about Nigeria, and because they lack the moral rights, moral nexus, moral capacity and competency to ask the Nigerians to do right. In Nigeria, the language was grab it, steal it, run away with it. And we saw how there was violence, there was larceny, and there was all kinds of brigandage during the last election. In Niger, there was a bloodless coup. And so you ask yourself, where's the moral latitude for Nigeria to say to Nigerians, return to democracy? Who indeed is actually democratic? In Nigeria, people are protesting against the way you emerge in power. In Niger, people are celebrating the overthrow of people my brother would call the Boy Scouts. Now, it's about a strong moral question. And the time has come for those who truly care, not only about our country, but about Africa, to begin to ask strong questions, and passionately so. So as we dialogue leadership in Africa and in Nigeria, going forward, I will make 3 strong suggestions. Leadership at the level of the media must become essentially and strongly dispassionate, pan-Nigerian, and truly dedicated to truth. Leadership at the level of the student unions, like we did 30 years ago when my brother was in the Unilag and I was in the University of Nigeria in the Wu campus, is we traverse this country with our brother Mayegun, our brother Nasiru Kura, and several others, talking about a new day and a new deal, and we were able to organize to engage the political, the military jackboots. The time has come for our young brothers and sisters who are still in the universities to rise up and preach a message strong enough to engage political thieves and looters. And then thirdly, we need a new tendencies of young people in politics who truly care about our country, because we must say to those who pretend to be leaders that it's time up. A highly progressive world expects so much from Nigeria. God has blessed us with amazing munificence and riches ineffable. Apologies to Obafemi Awolowo. And what we do with that great riches ineffable is our collective lot. It was Madiba, Mandela, who said a long time ago that Africa is waiting for Nigeria to rise up. That when Nigeria indeed that rises up, Africa will wake from its slumber. And so there is a challenge on the African young people and indeed Nigerian people to give leadership to Africa rather than populism, rather than just prognosis and speculations like we have today. Somebody tells us who did not emerge through free and fair elections that he wants to ensure that democracy returns to Niger. How more hypocritical and sycophantic can that be? You know,
okay.
Such sycophancy is not the way to go. Such hypocrisy is not the way to go. We need Africans who will wake up to the reality and the urgency of now. Remember what Sir Walter Scott said a long time ago. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Those who try to pretend, or those who pretend to be leaders in Africa, are essentially deceptive, because leadership is about service. Mitt Romney said some time ago in America when he was running against our brother Barack Obama, he said something clearly, that leadership shows the way. Unfortunately, what we have in Africa and indeed Nigeria, leaders who are blind by lust, blind by wanderlust, blinded by power, blinded by egocentricity and egotism, blinded by religion, blinded by region, and blinded by everything that does not work for good. So I think that the time has come for us to challenge everyone who steps into politics to do what is proper, right, and right.